know, been a lot of talk about Abraham Lincoln, but the president we need today is not Abraham Lincoln. The president we need today is Thomas Jefferson. He said that we needed a revolution every generation. Thomas Jefferson said you have to be ready in order to preserve the vitality of your liberty and your freedom, to defend it, not by overthrowing anything else except for what you've been holding in your head that may not be applicable anymore. We've gotten very lazy. We're many generations overdue for a revolution in our thinking. I'm not talking about blood and violence, although I'm afraid that's already happening. I'm talking about a revolution that's probably the hardest kind, the kind that takes place inside the human soul and the human mind. To be able to tear everything down, throw everything out, and start with a completely fresh piece of paper and say, okay, how do we solve this problem?
Can you talk to me a little bit? I mean, who are you?
Listen, this is not a plan that would make sense to anybody except God. You know, I gave up trying to figure that out a long time ago. I was born into a family deeply connected to the U.S. intelligence community. My mother had been a cryptanalyst at the Army Security Agency and NSA in World War II. Her work product went to the President Roosevelt and to Secretary of War Stinson and Cordell Hull at State. My father was an Air Force aviator who went to work for Martin Marietta on contracts for the CIA and the Air Force, namely the Titan III-C, which put up the CIA's Keyhole spy satellites. At age 19, when I was interning for LAPD, I was pulled into the chief's office because somebody discovered I had a Q clearance. I didn't know anything about it. I went home and asked Dad, and he said, yeah, because you're my son, and you know they have to do that because I might leave my briefcase open. But a Q was a secret compartmentalized clearance above top secret. I went through UCLA as a Republican who didn't like anything about the war in Vietnam, who didn't like anything about government, with this naive belief that, you know, you can get inside the system and change it from the inside. I became an LA policeman. Worked in South Central Los Angeles in the jungle, and the CIA tried unofficially to recruit me into an operation where they were smuggling drugs into the country back in 1976-77. And I wouldn't get involved in that. You know, I thought, well, geez, this must be an isolated incident of corruption. This must be something that everybody's going to want to correct right away. Oh, my God. And, of course, that was a mistake. Basically, my life disintegrated because I was betrayed by a woman who worked for CIA, who was my fiancée. And when I said I wouldn't get involved in drugs, she disappeared and people started shooting at me. And then it was a matter of saving my life. And the tools which I acquired to save my life then, which were, you know, writing letters to congressmen, getting on the record, trying to get newspaper stories written. Those were survival skills, but it was also a part of learning how things worked. I was a map maker, if you will, a cartographer, going out to try and map how the world really worked as opposed to the way we were told it worked. And the map that we have made has proved so startlingly accurate over 10 years, whether they had to do with gold prices or geopolitical developments or economic events. The only thing that amazes me is the speed with which things are falling apart. And that message now is the single most important thing in my life. It's the only thing in my life. Well, except for rock and roll music, good music, playing with my dog, and long walks on the beach. Rags, come here. Rags, come here. I first became focused on energy issues in late 2001, just maybe a month or two after 9/11. I was contacted by a geologist, a brilliant guy named Dale Allen Pfeiffer, who introduced me to the concept of peak oil and the basic issues about energy, and helped me to realize that There was a great deal of evidence in 2001, not only that peak oil was very real, but that government agencies were acting and responding as if it was very real. All plastic is oil. Most paints, all pesticides are made from oil. Everything from toothpaste to toothbrushes is made from oil. There are 7 gallons of oil in every tire. There is nothing anywhere in any combination that will replace the edifice built by fossil fuels. Nothing. Well, peak oil is probably now very easy to explain, much easier than it was a long time ago. People have felt what $147 a barrel oil feels like. Essentially, peak oil is like, if you know what a bell curve is, goes up, comes down. Peak oil is the point of oil production when you're at the top of the bell curve. And essentially what that means is you've used up half of the resource. But in the case of oil or any other substance like that, no matter how much money you throw at it, you're never going to be able to increase oil production above where it was at peak. As of 2008, the International Energy Agency has admitted that there is a global 9% decline rate in oil production. That's the equivalent of about 8 million barrels a day. There is no way, having plucked all the low-hanging fruit and found the big reservoirs, that we're going to be able to offset a 9% decline rate. From a detective standpoint, if you're trying to assemble a case, the multidimensional aspects of a case, means, motive, opportunity, to understand what kind of force drives events. Peak oil was almost, with the stroke of like a diamond cutter's knife, the single piece which started to make everything resonate and make sense together. You will recall that when the Bush administration took office in January 2001, a National Energy Policy Development Group, the NEPDG, was formed and placed under the exclusive, private, absolute control of Vice President Dick Cheney. Its records were kept a secret. Its minutes were kept a secret. 7 pages were released as a result of 2 lawsuits. And it clearly shows that that task force was looking, saying, how much oil is there? Where is it? Who owns it? They knew that this was coming for a long time. It's been known that this event, this collapse, this crash was coming.
Who they were. We can't even get information as to who was involved and what they were doing.
First of all, if you think there might be oil someplace, then what you do is you go drill a test well. Then what you have to do is to take that one well in the center, and then you drill a series of appraisal wells around that well to determine where the oil field might go. You don't know how much oil you're going to get, how deep it is, what kind of oil it's going to be. There are many different grades of oils, a lot of which are more expensive to refine. So all of that has to do with how long it takes to make something produce. How much energy do you get back for how much energy you invested? When oil was seeping out of the ground in Pennsylvania, you got a return of, 200 to 1. When you have to go offshore to deep water, drilling in 15,000 feet of water, and your first well costs $150 million to build, all that's energy that's being invested to get energy. And the moment you start burning more energy to get a barrel of oil out of the ground, then it's worth it. Forget about it. The world's been thoroughly explored over the last 120 years. There's no new major oil finds left. As a matter of fact, no field the size of Ghawar, the largest field in Saudi Arabia, has ever been discovered since. Saudi Arabia has 25% of the known oil reserves on the planet. 25%. Why, if Saudi Arabia has all these untapped reserves onshore, are they moving heavily into offshore drilling? Now, if it's 5, 10, 50 times more expensive to drill offshore than on land, doesn't that tell you that Saudi Arabia knows they've got no more oil to find? It's axiomatic that if Saudi Arabia has passed its peak and is in decline, the whole planet is, just because of the size of the reserves that are there. Iraq is oil that's not only accessible, it's right close to the Persian Gulf, which means it's a short distance to ships. They can put the pipelines, they can get that into the global supply stream as everything else declines. And Iraq was all about the oil. You know, a lot of people have admitted that, and like, duh. 11 days after 9/11, when there was no clear evidence that Saddam Hussein had anything to do with 9/11, of course he didn't, that the plans were started to invade Iraq, of course. That was the objective. Get control of that oil. Because Saddam Hussein had been talking about pricing his oil in euros, taking it away from the dollar. We got in there, we restructured everything, we put in a friendly government using the US dollar, and we assured the oil companies their quote-unquote fair access and fair share of Iraqi oil. We have no intention of leaving Iraq. We're never going to leave Iraq. Going back to 2004, we started building the largest, most permanent military bases, 3 of them in the world, plus the largest embassy compound that's ever been built. We built an embassy compound in Baghdad that's bigger than Vatican City. That's not a temporary deal. Nobody's going to take that oil, but we are sitting on it. But there is not enough oil in Iraq to change anything. Iraq probably has around 90 billion barrels of recoverable oil. That sounds like a lot of oil. But when you consider that in 2008 the world was consuming 85 million barrels a day, that means 1 billion barrels of oil only lasts for about 11 and a half days, so that ain't that much oil.
That's only the first of the good things that will come to Iraq, thanks to oil.
They knew exactly what was coming. That's what's in the National Energy Policy Development Group report that's been classified, because if that report were declassified, we would be building scaffolds to hang Dick Cheney and everybody in that administration tomorrow. Let's assume, just for the sake of discussion, that there's 600 billion barrels in the Arctic. First of all, it happens to be under the polar ice cap. That's a problem. The polar ice cap happens to be on, what, 10, 15,000 feet of water. The problem with the polar ice cap is it floats. It moves. So you can't drill a well on Tuesday and expect it to be in the same place on Thursday. That's why a lot of conservative think tanks and oil companies are cheering the melting of the polar ice caps.
Developing this tiny section of Anwar, eventually yield up to 1 million.
If there is oil in Anwar, there's no more than about a 6-month supply for the entire United States. There are no pipelines across 1,000 miles of tundra that's melting due to global warming, which means you can't sink pipes to support a pipeline in tundra that's turned to mud. There's no tanker routes. The wells aren't drilled, and yet we are spending our future as if that oil is there. We got to drop all this lying right now. If we don't need transparency about anything other than about how much oil is really left, because we don't know. Oil is a commodity. It's an asset. You make loans based upon what's in the ground. So you have all these accounting terms. Possible reserves, proven reserves, ultimately recoverable reserves, verified reserves, estimated, but actual reserve estimates are state secrets. The Saudis don't dare announce that they've passed their peak of oil production. Why? They have a very restive population that have been sold an expectation of a rising standard of living, and the moment Saudi Arabia acknowledges its past peak, it may well have a revolution. Now, what happens if there's a revolution in Saudi Arabia with 25% of the world's known oil? Where's that oil going to get replaced from? It can't be. Very complex problem. It's a very complex situation.
Just start working now,